a big reaction. It'll be this slow hollowing out.
Good,
and even when they talk about, we're taking these powers for 7 years, and then we will send them back to Scotland. Yeah. Well, will it be to Holyrood, or will it be to this new expanded... It's not even called the Scotland office anymore. It's called the UK government in Scotland. It used to pretend to be our representation in the cabinet. It now doesn't pretend that at all. It's the UK government in Scotland. So I don't think they would shut it. I think they will just allow it to become a hollow figurehead.
Hi, Philippa. I could have asked you this at my kitchen table. I could have, and I'm sure we'll continue the discussion. So you touched on some of the themes that interest me as well, particularly about we're being presented almost with a Hobson's choice in terms of a no deal or a thoroughly bad deal, which kind of varies from a minor 2% drop in GDP or a 5% drop in GDP or 8% if there's no deal. Assuming the best option of merely a 2% drop in GDP, what that means is an insidious drip away over a period of time. We'll start to see at the moment, we know that banks, and I expect announcements soon, are talking about moving major functions into Europe. What's tended to happen, and what we've seen in Scotland, is that major departments move to London, and then to get the economies of scale, other departments would move to be next to them. And of course, Paris is now being talked about as the destination of choice. That will only become apparent over a period of time. And I'm sure there'll be many other examples that you'll see and your point about public procurement is excellent. So therefore, my question is, what are the risks associated with taking a stance of waiting to see what happens with Brexit before we start to move forward from a Scottish Government perspective? From my personal view, it's loaded with risk, because by that point, we will be functioning even less well as an economy and have less power and control to do something about it. And I just wondered what your views are.
Oh, I mean, I don't think that we can wait to see how Brexit turns out. I think, it's like, I remember a talk about doing randomized controlled trials of new drugs. And somebody pointed out there are some trials you don't need to do. You do not need to do a randomized controlled trial as to whether you need a parachute if you jump out of a plane. You just look at it and you think, no, I don't volunteer to be in the control group. So, we can see where Brexit is going. We do not need to wait and see the outcome. As I say, I can understand that the First Minister is trying to look at what kind of a deal it's going to be. And that means waiting until October, November, whenever it is we hear. But the 2% option you're talking about is staying in the EEA and the Customs Union. And unfortunately, that one they've been ruling out for 2 years. So no, I certainly personally do not support the idea that you wait another year or 2 years and see how Brexit turns out, because I think that would damage a lot of businesses in Scotland. It would mean a lot of people losing their jobs, and it would mean a lot of suffering. And while people are conscious of the banks moving away, one of the small things that, again, I don't think people were in Westminster were paying much attention to, one of the processes in drug production is quality control. And that has to be carried out inside the EU. Now, big companies like GSK, they do it themselves here. But we have companies like Merck who actually do that on behalf of other drug companies. And we've got several centres in Scotland where that is what they do. These jobs are already in the process of moving to the continent. It is inevitable because them's the rules. So we'll keep the people who are doing the quality control and lot release for lot release into the UK. But for lot release to Europe, those jobs will have to move. And the problem is, the next time a big American multinational wants to open a new production site for a drug company, it's not likely to be in the UK if there's a whole lot of things it can't do. So it's not necessarily that things will shut down very quickly, but we will not be able to attract future centres of this kind of production because there'll just be too much hassle between the UK and the EU.
I say thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it. My name's Jim Carey, and I'm wondering if you might agree with me that we cannot develop anything for the future until we know the outcome of 2 court cases, one in the ECJ and one on the Supreme Court of UK. Nothing can move forward till those judgments are made. You agree with that?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think that I think it's important that we are moving forward. As I said, I mean, the obviously the Supreme Court case is just another example of the contempt that Scotland's held in. That the Westminster government are taking the Scottish government to court over having a continuity bill. I mean, you know, as you opened, you said we can't move forward. I don't think Scotland can move forward until we are independent, until we make our own decisions and go forward. Scotland is 1/3 of the UK landmass. We're constantly told what a great deal we get with a Barnett consequential of 9.3% because our population's only 8.3%. But we're expected to run 1/3 of the UK landmass. That's road, rail, broadband, schools and hospitals for 1/3 of the UK landmass. I was up in Orkney on holiday, and 2 of the companies that were developing the marine energy, tidal energy, something that would be base load, are leaving because the support has been cut from Westminster, something that is our post-oil energy boom. It's simply that decisions in Westminster will never be made for Scotland. So, I mean, I don't particularly accept that we have to sit back and wait for these court cases. I don't agree with that, but I do agree that I don't think Scotland can move forward until Scotland makes its own decisions.
Very quick and maybe simplistic question. Why do you think Westminster fears or hates so much for Scotland to be an independent nation and run itself?
Because basically Scotland has been being told throughout the last 100 years or more that we are, you know, paupers, that we are kept, that we sit there with our enamel tin. If you go back and look at the first quarter of the 20th century, when Glasgow built about 1/3 of the world's ships, it used to be that Scotland sent 11 or 12 million to Westminster and got about 3 million back. And in about 1921-22, they stopped publishing the figures. And while everyone's gone on in the last couple of years about, oh, look what happened with the oil price, isn't that terrible? Yeah, funny, it's back up over $80 a barrel, and I'm not hearing much talk about that. Basically, the oil from Scotland underwrote the UK throughout the 80s. And if you look at the data, what you'll see at that time is that the tax take per head from Scotland was significantly higher than elsewhere. So we might get told that we are benefit junkies or whatever else, but in actual fact, Scotland puts a significant amount of money, whether it's salmon, whether it's whiskey, whether it's oil, whether it's computer games, whether it's tourism. We put a significant amount into the UK Treasury.
Hi. Do you think that Europe will put a time limit on, we'll say Scotland doesn't become independent for 10 more years, but then it does become independent and it wants to get back into Europe? Do you think there'll be any problems Scotland rejoining in, say, 10 years or something?
I think there'd be the problems that would occur in 10 years is that within the next 10 years, if you read what the Brexiteers want, they want a deregulated UK, they want lowest common denominator, they want to get rid of a lot of what they call red tape and regulation. Now, when I was a young surgeon, having people coming in with thermal burns, chemical burns, finger and hand injuries, limb injuries from industrial accidents was really common. One man's regulation is another man's life and limb. So, you know, we know from the Jacob Rees-Moggs and the others that they want the UK to be a sort of Singapore on the Thames or whatever. So the problem is in 10 years' time, we would be a long way from the EU rules. And part of getting back in would be you would have to realign. The important thing at the moment is that we are utterly aligned with the rules. And Guy Verhofstadt, who is the Brexit lead for the European Parliament, when he was giving evidence in Westminster recently, and one of the Conservatives was trying to goad him into saying that Scotland wouldn't get in, and he was basically going, well, you know, of course they would. It's just a fact. They meet all the rules. So the sooner we would go back in, the better. And that's why I hope that we will actually declare that we're going to have a referendum, even if we don't hold it before March, but making it clear this is our direction of travel. We are not leaving. We voted to stay in Europe. We're staying in Europe, so that Europe know that that's our plan.
Hi, Philippa. My name is Joyce. In the case that there is a no-deal Brexit, how can the United Kingdom, when we haven't paid our debts and what we owe and fulfilled our contracts to Europe, how can we possibly expect other countries to deal with us and trust us?
Well, Philip Hammond has made that clear in the past. I mean, obviously the Brexiteers like to talk about the 40 billion that they have agreed they owe the EU as somehow buying us a free trade deal or special treatment. It's not. It's just settling up your bar tab before you leave. You know, you don't settle up your bar tab and expect them to throw in a 3-course meal. But unfortunately, that's what they do. And as he has pointed out, if the UK defaulted on that, in actual fact, they would become pariahs in the financial world. So I don't see that. Now, while people talk about a no deal, I think Europe will be trying to make even a no deal be a minimal no deal, that there will be certain agreements that they will try to bring about so that the planes keep flying, so that citizens are not made illegal, etc. But the problem is unless there is a backstop on Ireland, unless there is a withdrawal agreement, there is no transition. And for businesses, that literally means the clock counts down to the 29th of March next year, and then we crash out. As I say, I think Europe feels like they're expected to be the grown-up because the UK are the ones throwing tantrums. I mean, like Jeremy Hunt talking about Europe and as if they were the Soviet Union. I mean, the offence, my husband keeps an eye on German and European media. The offence that has caused across Eastern Europe is immense. And I was on a delegation in the September after the Brexit vote in Germany, and we were sitting in their foreign ministry with other people in the delegation lecturing the Brexit lead of the German government that they had to get rid of freedom of movement. And I then pointed out, do you realise where this building is? We are behind the wall. We're behind the Iron Curtain. Do you understand what freedom of movement means to Germans? To actually reunite their families that were divided by a wall? Do you understand what it means for Eastern Europeans? I mean, literally, we spent over a year sticking 2 fingers up at Europe before they even sent the Article 50 letter. And they keep performing and giving speeches that are frankly offensive, and then think that that helps us in some way. I don't know whether they think they don't have television in Europe. I've often thought, do they think we don't have television in Scotland when they say things that are so offensive to us? Or do they think that people in Europe don't speak English? But this business of being utterly rude and offensive to Europeans and then expecting special treatment is a very bizarre way to behave.
Could I just ask a couple of questions? First of all, is there in the SNP at the moment a sort of, if you like, an independent strategy group? Because it would seem that people like yourself would be very well placed on it. And if there isn't, do you think there should be one set up straight away? Secondly, on the matter of the referendum, when Nicola says to Theresa, we're going to have a referendum, and Theresa says, now is not the time, what should Nicola's strategy be?
The strategy group, certainly in Westminster, we discuss approaches to Westminster, and obviously one of the things that we're trying to do as MPs covering many of the reserved issues that Scotland doesn't control is actually use our, if you like, brain power, research power, experience to be trying to think through where we should be going. I mean, clearly Keith Brown in becoming the deputy of the party, but also has been made minister in essence for campaigning and for independence. So the problem is I spend most of my time, 500 miles down the road in exile. So I'm not totally finger on the pulse of what's happening in Holyrood, but certainly those of us in Westminster are already thinking about what should we be doing and how do we go about it. But, independence, we wouldn't be having a chance of independence if we didn't have the SNP. We wouldn't have had